All right, chapter 14. Remember, they just took their exam. Bess and Hannah and Miss Walters called them in the door. Chapter 14. Hannah went straight to the shop, the first time she'd been there in nearly 2 weeks. Oh, how it had changed. Before, all she had seen were the bones of the building. Now, an honest to goodness shop stood in front of her, and a handsome one of that. The siding had been painted sage green, with a darker green trim. The double doors with their center panels and brass knobs gave the facade an elegant look. The large window to the left of the door let in plenty of light. Hannah stepped into the spacious interior, which smelled of freshly cut wood. There were piles of curly wood shavings everywhere. She ran her hand down the counter that Mr. Hart had built along the south wall. Behind it were shelves right up to the ceiling, each shelf wide enough to hold bolts of fabric. In the corner was the door to the storeroom. More shelves lined the east and north walls. A fancy coal heater stood in the back corner, the decorative scrolls of its nickel top shiny with newness. She followed the sounds of the hammering through the door behind the counter into the storeroom. Papa was nailing around the window. Mr. Hart was sawing a board placed across two sawhorses. The room looked very much like Hannah's sketch, with the countertop along the two sides. Hello, Papa. Hello, Mr. Hart. They both stopped their work to greet her. She put her books down on the counter, pulled out a piece of paper, and held it up in front of her. Mr. Hart tilted his head and began to read out loud. This is to certify that Hannah Mae Edmonds has hereby completed the regular course of instruction. He stopped and he glanced from her to Papa and back again. Your diploma? Papa asked. Hannah nodded. Charlie had gone back to reading. Now he looked up and whistled. Listen to this. Geography 87, History 84, Orthography 100, Arithmetic 77, Grammar 98. Those are some mighty fine marks there. Papa walked over and took the diploma from her to read it himself. When he looked at her, she was surprised by the gentleness in his eyes. He cleared his throat. I was thinking of your mama, he said softly. She'd be right proud of you. Thank you, Papa. She could only whisper, caught between the smile on her lips and the lump in her throat. Papa set a date for the grand opening, a week from Tuesday. One more week of shipments, then the weekend to make sure everything's okay. Don't care to open on a Monday, so Tuesday it is. Yes, Papa. We'll be moving over tomorrow. I'm counting on you to get the rented place packed up. That wouldn't be too bad. Knowing that their stay in the rented house would be short, she had kept things pretty well organized for repacking. She could hardly believe that they would be living in a house of their own. Would this be the last time she would have to pack for moving? Papa was still speaking. Those parties Mama used to give. The mention of Mama caught her attention. I remember them, Hannah said. Before Mama got sick, she had hosted parties at the shop in Los Angeles 2 or 3 times a year. Those parties were among Hannah's fondest memories. She'd been so young, only 4 or 5. Still, a few of the details stood out clearly. Mama always served lemonade and another cold drink made from juju fruits, a kind of dried Chinese date. She bought mooncakes from Chinatown's best bakery and arranged a beautiful tray of grapes and orange slices or tangerines. People ate and drank and chatted, looked at the goods, shopped, and put in orders. Customers would give Hannah sweets or pennies. Even though it was a tailor shop for men, the women were always invited. Mama and Papa had known that it was often the ladies who chose the tailor for their menfolk. The women met old friends as well as neighbors they hadn't before. The shop became a neighborhood hub, and people looked forward to the gatherings. A party would be good for the opening, Papa said, but I won't have time. You'll have to do it. Hannah's eyes widened. He wants me to take charge of the party? It was a daunting thought. She had never given a party. In fact, she hadn't been to one of those parties of Mama's. She hadn't been to one since those parties of Mama's. She thought back and realized what she most likely remembered and how exciting it had been to see a group of people in one place, enjoying themselves and each other. A second recollection came to mind then, serving soup to the Indian woman and the girl. You feed people. That's what makes a party. There was no bakery in town, and fresh fruit would cost a fortune to have it shipped in. But I could make a cake or some cookies. She looked at Papa. I'll need lemons for lemonade, she said. Cost too much, he objected. She thought for a minute. Ginger shrub, then. Shrub was made with a powdered ginger and cider vinegar stirred into cool water with a little sugar. It was pleasant, refreshing drink that will cost a lot less than lemonade. Hmm. And you'll need to get white flour and white sugar. He put up his hands. Anything else? She knew he was being sarcastic, but he didn't sound angry. Papa, the party was your idea. If we're not gonna do it, if we're not going to do it right, we oughtn't do it at all. That was one of Mama's sayings. Write me up a list, he said. I'll get what I can. It might not be everything you need, so you'll just have to make do. We're going to read another chapter because that was pretty short. Chapter 15. The next week, Hannah and Papa carried the last few boxes from the rented house into the store building. It was the two of them now. With the heavy work done, Papa no longer needed Charlie Hart's help. The shop's second floor had been divided into two bedrooms. On the landing at the top of the stairs, there was a space for two chairs, with a small round table between them. Not big enough to be called a parlor, it would still be a nice place to sit and read during spring and fall. A lamp stood on the table. There was a bedroom on either side of the landing. Hannah's room was at the back of the house, Papa's at the front. She had already put a curtain over Papa's window. Now she did the same for hers. Her bedroom held a very little bedstead, a shelf along one wall, hooks for hanging clothes. Mama's old plaid shawl was draped at the foot of the bed. The books Miss Lorna had given her were lined on the shelf. She took a look around her room. Not a rented place, not a wagon, but a room in a house that they owned. Hannah! Papa was calling from the front of the shop. She hurried downstairs and out the door to the board sidewalk where he was folding a stepladder. He had just put up the shop's new sign. It hung from an iron bar that stuck out over the door and could be read by those walking or riding down the street. On a dark green background, white lettering was identical on both sides. It was elegant, but still easy to read. Edmund's Dress Goods. Hannah gasped in delight at the sight of the five-petaled lotus outlined in the gilt paint. Papa had gotten rid of so many of Mama's things when she died. He had a good excuse. They had been preparing to travel in the wagon. But since then, Hannah had missed some of those things. The blue and white bowl that had held the oranges, the enameled vase adorned with birds and flowers, the carved wooden chopsticks. At times she felt as though he had done this to erase Mama's presence from their lives. Now she realized that she had been unfair about the thought he was keeping Mama's lotus, putting it right out in front of the sign. The sign was bordered in gilt. It had been stenciled and painted by Mr. Clyde in the newspaper office. Papa told her that he had applied 3 coats of varnish to protect it from the weather. Hannah walked backwards a few steps to view the sign from further away. She couldn't stop smiling. It looks nice, Papa. He smiled back. Hope the whole town thinks the same, he said. Next, they looked at the window display. The inside of the front window was covered with a sheet of brown packing paper. Papa would take the paper down on the morning of the opening. Hannah was in charge of organizing the display. She had tacked swags of fabric to the ceiling of the window well, a robin's egg blue lawn alternating with puffs of larger, darker blue chiffon. The effect was that of a soft, romantic sky. Beneath the swags of cloth, a simple rack made of lathe and dowel rods stood in the middle of the deep still. It had been painted sage green to match the shop's exterior. She had chosen 3 bolts of fabric, the wine-colored watered silk, a cheerful calico in blue and pink and cream plaid, and a fawn-colored challis string with a feathery pattern. She unrolled a few yards from each bolt, draped the loose fabric over the dowels, leaving the bolts themselves out of sight behind the rack. Then she tied ribbon around the fabric, each of which looked like a gathered skirt flowing from the waist created by the ribbon. Hannah had always made it a point to examine every tailor and dressmaker's shop she came across. She had seen a rack like this one in San Francisco. Charlie Howard had made it to her design. I like it, Papa said. Thank you, Papa, but I'm thinking it's still not quite right. Well, he looked at the display. That brown packing paper's kind of ugly. Papa, she said, rolling her eyes at his teasing. He grinned, and she felt something like a warm bubble expanding in her heart. There had been so few smiles between them since Mama's death, and today they already exchanged two. After dinner, I'd like to take the wagon and go out of town a ways, Hannah said. I'm going to dig up some prairie rose bushes and put them in the window well, so it'll make it look nice, and then there will be refreshments. But can you think of anything else we could do to make the opening really special? His frown returned immediately. You always want too much, he said. I think we should do something different. The shop in Los Angeles. Did you and Mama ever? I remember the parties, but I don't remember much about them. Papa snapped his fingers. You put me in mind of something, he said, and his eyes bright once again. A raffle. Sometimes it takes money to make a raffle. The prizes will cost us some, but a raffle will bring in people who might not otherwise come. A raffle. He explained how it would work. There would be a box on the counter where people will put in their visiting cards as they enter the shop. When the box was full of cards, Papa would draw one at random, and the person whose name was on the card would win a prize. We'll have the drawing mid-morning, maybe around 10 or so, before folks leave to go home for their dinners. Let's have, he paused for a moment, three winners maybe. Your mama loved a raffle. She always wanted us to put up more prizes. I remember once I had to talk her down from nine. That sounded like Mama. How about five? Hannah suggested. Three small prizes, one medium, and a grand prize. Five's good. Can I choose the prizes, Papa? Suits me. Just show me what you pick out. I don't want you losing your head and giving away the whole shop. Hannah examined the display counter, the shelves, the drawers. She looked through every cupboard and cabinet in the storefront and made her close. A packet of a dozen needles in various sizes, a string of assorted buttons, a cheerful posy of colored ribbons. These would be the small prizes. The medium prize would be a length of lace, enough to make a pair of cuffs and a matching collar, which she rolled and tied with the pretty silk flower. For the grand prize, she inspected their stock of sewing baskets and picked up a small one lined with a bright striped calico. The underside of its lid was padded and tufted to serve as a pincushion. She filled the basket with all kinds of notions: a paper of pins, a packet of needles, several spools of thread, a pair of embroidery scissors, dressmaker's chalk, a cloth tape measure, and a German silver thimble. She held it up admiringly. It was something she herself would like to win. She showed the prizes to Papa, who gave his approval. I have another idea, she said, and she hurried on before he could say anything. Remember how Mama always used to invite the ladies to the shop for those parties? I think we should do the same here. I mean, the opposite. We should have something for the men. What are the men going to want in a dress shop? She hadn't thought of that far. Maybe a gift for their wives or someone else in his family? He waved his hands dismissively. The only thing men will want is for their womenfolk not to spend too much money in here. Oh, she clapped with delight. Papa, that's it. We do a separate drawing for the men, and their prize is a discount. How about 30% less on whatever their wife buys at the opening? Papa raised his eyebrows. She could tell that he was surprised, and she detected a grudging admiration in his eyes. Make up a nice little card as a discount token, he said, but 20%, not 30. And he headed for the door. I'm going to paint up a quick sign to stand on the sidewalk announcing the raffle. Now that should bring folks in. Now Hannah was even more excited about the opening.